Have you ever stopped to think about why sometimes being intelligent seems more like a curse than a blessing? Why do the brightest minds often end up alone, while people with average intellects seem to thrive socially? This is an intriguing mystery that has concerned philosophers for centuries. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most direct and profound philosophers in history, was one of the first to unravel this enigma almost 2 centuries ago. Schopenhauer believed that intelligence functions like a mirror. When someone with great intelligence enters a room, they reflect the limitations and insecurities of others. And what happens when someone is confronted with a reflection they dislike? Discomfort arises. People generally don't forgive those who make them face truths they prefer to ignore, and this is especially true when it comes to intelligence. Have you noticed that while we celebrate wealth, beauty, physical strength, and other forms of superiority, intelligence is treated quite differently? Instead of being celebrated, it often sparks a subtle resentment, almost a type of aversion. This is something most people don't even admit to feeling. Why does this happen? Why does superior intelligence provoke this kind of reaction, while other forms of superiority are accepted or even admired? Schopenhauer saw a dark side to human nature, one that, surprisingly, remains just as relevant today as it did in the 19th century. He was aware that social dynamics weren't just about intellect or abilities. It was about how people deal with their own insecurities when confronted with something that makes them question their own position in the world. Born in 1788 in Germany, Schopenhauer was not just a philosopher who withdrew from reality. He lived the social dynamics he analyzed. During his years as a professor, he noticed something interesting. He scheduled his classes at the same time as Hegel's, a highly successful philosopher of the time, whom Schopenhauer considered a fraud. While Hegel attracted large crowds, Schopenhauer lectured to empty rooms. Rather than becoming bitter, he was fascinated by what this difference said about human behavior. Why do people prefer comfortable truths over uncomfortable realities? Throughout his career, Schopenhauer observed the relationship between intelligence and social exclusion, not only in universities, but in all environments. He noticed a pattern. The brighter a person was, the more others found subtle ways to exclude them. It wasn't due to arrogance or rudeness, but because the mere presence of someone highly intelligent made others feel inferior. He saw that this pattern wasn't isolated, but was a constant repeated across cultures and eras. And the most intriguing part, Schopenhauer didn't have much financial means, but he had the freedom to analyze society without needing its approval. He noticed how social groups formed, and who was included and who was pushed out. It wasn't a pretty dynamic, but it was a consistent one. Schopenhauer became fascinated by how people reacted to those who challenged their intellectual status quo. Today, modern science confirms many of Schopenhauer's observations. Recent social studies reveal that even when intelligence is admired, it can generate discomfort and exclusion. Psychology is also beginning to show evidence of how intelligent people face social rejection. Brain imaging research has revealed something fascinating. When people feel intellectually inferior, the same neural pathways associated with physical pain are activated. It's not just a metaphor when we say that intelligence hurts the ego. The brain literally processes it as a physical threat. In 2021, a study identified that when we encounter someone more intelligent, our brain activates the amygdala, the area responsible for threat perception. This happens instinctively, almost like a self-protection response. The reaction is so strong that, in group settings, the sense of threat is amplified. When we are alone with a more intelligent person, the discomfort is less. But when we're in a larger group, the reaction seems to intensify. This suggests that, more than worrying about our own image, our brain is programmed to protect our social status, and does not enjoy being confronted with someone who makes us feel smaller. This instinctive reaction is not a surprise. But the true depth of Schopenhauer's ideas lies in how he reflected on these unconscious processes. He noticed that intelligence is not merely rejected randomly, but because it touches something deep in human psychology. When a more intelligent person enters a conversation, others often unconsciously compare themselves to that person, not because they want to, but because it's almost inevitable. It's like being placed next to a professional athlete in an amateur game. No matter how hard you try, your limitation becomes obvious. Schopenhauer also made an interesting observation about human behavior. He noticed that, instead of admitting feelings of inferiority, people often project these discomforts onto the intelligent person. They don't say, "This person makes me feel inferior." Instead, they assume that the intelligent person looks down on them, even if they've never done or said anything to suggest it. This is fascinating because the more intelligent someone is, the less likely they are to judge others. Their mere presence, however, can make others feel inadequate. This phenomenon also manifests differently between men and women. Intelligent men often face direct confrontation or subtle exclusion, while intelligent women face a double bind. In addition to being rejected for their intelligence, they also challenge social expectations about how women should behave. Society tends to force intelligent women to choose between being loved and being respected, but not both. Women who combine beauty and intelligence often face more social isolation. These observations by Schopenhauer help us better understand the complex dynamics between intelligence, insecurity, and social norms. And this still holds true today, more than 150 years later. Schopenhauer, with his unique perspective, realized that intelligence, more than any other quality, creates a profound psychological disturbance in social interactions. The mere presence of a brilliant mind can alter the dynamics of a group, even without that person doing or saying anything. The key to this phenomenon lies in how intelligence awakens a direct confrontation with people's own insecurities. This type of confrontation is not something people want. In fact, many prefer to live in a state of cognitive comfort, where all they need to do is feel accepted and comfortable in their own level of understanding. Schopenhauer observed that mediocrity has a social power that intelligence cannot match. People with average intellect do not challenge anyone. They remain on the same level, which, in a way, keeps everyone around them more at ease. Have you noticed how, in social gatherings, conversations tend to revolve around simple jokes, superficial observations, or shallow topics? These conversations don't generate discomfort because they are easy to understand and don't put anyone in a position of intellectual vulnerability. When someone starts expressing more complex ideas, the environment changes immediately. People become tense, often uncomfortable, because their intellectual limitations are exposed. This doesn't mean the idea itself is wrong or useless, but rather that it creates an emotional impact on others, challenging their perception of the world. This pattern applies not only to informal social groups, but also to workplaces and even the arts world. For example, have you noticed how mediocre artists, shallow writers, or musicians with little skill often receive more attention and success than those who are more talented? Not because people don't notice the difference, but because mediocrity doesn't create discomfort. It doesn't threaten people's worldview. In the modern world, this phenomenon is even more visible. Think about your own experience in the workplace or on social media. Where do you most often see this pattern repeat? Often, the most intelligent people are the ones who remain isolated, whose more complex ideas are ignored, while superficial content goes viral. This reflects a well-established social dynamic observed by Schopenhauer centuries ago. Even in tech companies, which often pride themselves on their intellectual capacity, the most successful individuals are not always the brightest. Instead, it's those who know how to make others feel smart and capable without ever making them feel challenged or threatened. Social media amplifies this phenomenon even more. What do we see most often? Easy to understand memes, quick jokes, and content that doesn't require deep reflection. Meanwhile, more complex ideas, which require intellectual effort and make us question our beliefs, are often ignored. This is a direct reflection of the discomfort intelligence can cause. Because depth makes people think, it generates uncertainty, and it's much easier to share something simple and popular that keeps everyone comfortable than something that makes people question their worldview. This paradox is also present in the educational system. Schools claim to value intelligence, but what is really rewarded are students who know how to simplify their ideas to be easily accepted by others. Innovation, original thinking, and intellectual complexity are often undervalued because they challenge general understanding and create discomfort. Schopenhauer had already identified this in his time and called this phenomenon the final social paradox. In other words, society needs brilliant minds in progress, but at the same time, it actively resists those who create new ideas because it causes discomfort. The examples of historical figures like Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, and Marie Curie teach us an important lesson. These geniuses face rejection during their lifetimes. Newton was a solitary figure, despised by many in his time, and Einstein was called a fool by professors who didn't understand his revolutionary ideas. Curie faced resistance in the scientific community, but today, they are revered as some of the greatest geniuses in the history of humanity. What Schopenhauer teaches us with these examples is that often great minds are not understood in their time. They face resistance but are eventually recognized for the impact they had on society. This paradox continues to manifest in our daily lives. Companies talk about valuing creativity, but in practice, what we often see are ideas that follow the path of conformity. Universities claim to seek brilliant minds, but frequently reward those who don't challenge the norms. Society needs innovation, but at the same time, it resists those who dare to think differently. Schopenhauer explained this clearly. Intelligence is an uncontrollable power. Unlike wealth, which can be regulated, or physical strength, which has its limits, the human mind cannot be controlled. What a brilliant mind can think or create cannot be restricted. And understanding this dynamic is essential to understanding the relationship between intelligence and social acceptance. However, this doesn't mean that those who are intellectually superior are doomed to solitude. Schopenhauer didn't just point out the problems. He also provided solutions. The first step is understanding that your intelligence is not a mistake. The reaction you get from others is not personal, but social. People don't react to your intelligence because you're wrong, but because it reflects a truth they prefer not to see. The secret is knowing when and with whom to share your ideas. It's not about hiding your intelligence or pretending to be less than you are, but choosing the right moments and environments where your intelligence will be valued. This kind of social discernment is essential to avoid feeling isolated or misunderstood. Schopenhauer also noticed that very intelligent people tend to form small groups of intellectuals who share a similar vision. Today, with the internet, it's easier than ever to connect with other brilliant minds. You don't need everyone around you to understand you, just the right people. Great intellectuals throughout history found ways to reconcile their genius with social acceptance. Richard Feynman, for example, became famous not only for his intelligence, but for his ability to communicate complex ideas in an accessible way without ever oversimplifying them. He made his intelligence inviting, not threatening. Another example is Ada Lovelace, who created the concept of social laboratories, spaces where intelligent people could freely exchange ideas and learn from one another. She showed that intelligence doesn't have to be isolating if you create the right environment. Even Benjamin Franklin, known for his brilliance, presented himself as a learner rather than an authority. He shared his ideas in an accessible way, making his intelligence a collective journey. These examples show us that being intelligent doesn't mean being destined for loneliness. The key is understanding social dynamics and working with them, not against them. This means sometimes stepping back and wisely choosing where and with whom to share your ideas. At other times, it means embracing your uniqueness and recognizing that your intelligence is not an obstacle but a gift. Schopenhauer's observations are timeless because they touch on something deeply human. Our instincts for social belonging and our discomfort with intellectual superiority are universal. But by understanding these dynamics, we can navigate the challenges of intellectual life without losing sight of who we are. So, next time you feel isolated or misunderstood, remember that the problem is not your intelligence. It's the way society reacts to it. The more you embrace this understanding, the more you'll be able to find the right spaces for your mind to thrive. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for more philosophical reflections. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on Schopenhauer's perspective and whether you've also experienced the effects of loneliness in your life.